You watch someone demand special treatment by highlighting their minor discomfort. They receive the upgrade or the apology while you remain silent. It is easy to resent this vocal entitlement in a stranger. Yet, you have likely used distress to bypass a difficult boundary. The mind uses vocalized suffering as a high-stakes survival leverage. By the end, you will understand the dark utility of distress. We are conditioned to view constant complaining as a simple personality defect or a sign of weakness. However, evolutionary psychology reveals that vocalized dissatisfaction is a sophisticated tool for social and environmental manipulation. When an individual highlights their suffering, they trigger an ancient biological response in the surrounding group members. The human brain is hardwired to resolve the distress signals of others to maintain collective focus. Labels like complainers in our title describe a specific psychological survival pattern, not an individual's personhood. This pattern acts as a hidden psychological trap that forces the environment to adapt to the individual. It is an adaptive mechanism rooted in the biological necessity of securing attention and limited communal resources. Most people first notice this pattern in someone close to them, like a demanding family member. You see them use their physical or emotional exhaustion to avoid doing the shared household chores. They are not necessarily lying, but they are emphasizing their pain to negotiate a social exit. By highlighting their distress, they essentially tax the emotional energy of everyone else in the room. The group grants them a pass because the cost of listening to the complaint is too high. This is a form of negative reinforcement where the individual is rewarded for remaining in a state of crisis. Behavioral science suggests that this creates a neurological loop where the mind associates complaining with immediate relief. The person is not seeking a solution to their problem, but a shift in the power dynamic. We mistake the complaint for a request for help, but it is often a demand for submission. This is where the pattern becomes difficult to ignore in professional and personal social hierarchies. We follow the distress signal because the brain views an unresolved complaint as a threat to cohesion. The individual who complains the most effectively colonizes the mental space of everyone else around them. They get away with it because the social friction required to ignore them is physically painful. Most people first notice this pattern in someone close to them, like a coworker who hates every task. They vent so loudly and so often that the manager eventually gives the hard work to you. You are the reliable one. Yet you are the one carrying the heavier load of the team. The complainer has successfully traded their social reputation for a lighter physical and emotional workload. This is not a moral failure, but a primal strategy to minimize personal effort and maximize survival. The brain seeks to conserve energy by making its perceived suffering a problem for the entire tribe. We see this as a flaw, yet we participate in it by rewarding the most vocal distress. The hidden self knows that a quiet worker is an invisible worker in a competitive world. By making noise, the individual ensures they are never overlooked or forgotten by the social structure. What looks like a nuisance here quietly reshapes everything later as we explore the psychological origin. The pattern is a survival response to a world that often ignores those who suffer in silence. Choosing awareness over avoidance means looking at why we allow ourselves to be manipulated by noise. Staying with uncomfortable psychological truth reveals the architecture of how vocal pain creates social power. Join a space where unspoken patterns are examined honestly to see the cost of the loud self. The blueprint for strategic dissatisfaction is often drafted during the earliest stages of human emotional development. A child possesses no economic or physical power and must rely entirely on vocalized distress to survive. If a caregiver only responds to high-intensity crying, the child learns that moderate communication is biologically ineffective. This early environment creates a neurological loop where peace is dangerous because it leads to being forgotten. Psychologist Erik Erikson highlighted how trust is built on the reliability of a caregiver's response to need. If that response is only triggered by crisis, the mind begins to equate suffering with its only safety. Evolutionary psychology suggests that the squeaky wheel remains a dominant strategy for securing limited tribal attention. The mind archives the success of every tantrum and every plea for help as a survival win. Fear-based adaptation ensures that the individual views a lack of attention as a precursor to total abandonment. Most people first notice this pattern in someone close to them, like a sibling who was always sick. You might remember how their minor ailments redirected the entire family's emotional and financial resources toward them. Their mind was not being malicious, it was merely responding to the reality of the social landscape. They discovered that being vulnerable was actually the most powerful position they could occupy in the house. The brain learns to exaggerate its internal state to ensure the external world remains focused on its protection. Social learning reinforces this when we see that the most vocal critics are the ones who get results. We observe adults who get their bills lowered or their meals replaced simply by expressing a loud dissatisfaction. The mind internalizes the rule that those who suffer quietly are simply volunteering to be the victims. Childhood conditioning often links our sense of belonging to the amount of care we can successfully extract. If a person was ignored when they were happy, they will view happiness as a threat to their survival. To prevent the catastrophe of being overlooked, the ego adopts a permanent stance of being deeply wronged. The mind becomes a collector of grievances, documenting every slight to use as future leverage in social trades. Social pressure to be positive is felt by the chronic complainer as a threat to their hard-earned power. They believe they are simply being honest about a world that is fundamentally and permanently unfair to them. This origin story explains why some people feel an almost physical need to find a problem in everything. Their internal map of the world is drawn with a red circle around their own perceived and constant pain. Every situation is scanned for the flaw that will allow them to claim the status of the victim. What started as a desperate cry for a bottle matures into a sophisticated method of social management. The origin of vocal distress is often found in a deep-seated fear of ever being truly self-sufficient. We build these habits because we are afraid that if we stop complaining, no one will look at us. The pattern is a survival mechanism for those who feel they have no other courtesy to offer. By looking at these roots, we see that complaining is a way of anchoring oneself in the group. It is an attempt to create an unbreakable bond of guilt and responsibility between the self and others. This is where the behavior stops being an annoyance and becomes a core pillar of the personality. The mind is locked in a state where it cannot afford to be satisfied or at peace. Every resolution of a problem is a crisis for the ego, because a solved problem is lost leverage. Understanding this origin allows us to see the profound insecurity hidden behind the mask of the critic. The internal drive to vocalize distress manifests in social circles as a constant, heavy demand for emotional labor. In professional environments, this often looks like the colleague who turned a minor procedural change into a catastrophe. They spend hours discussing their frustration with the new system instead of simply learning how to use it. While it feels like unproductive venting, it is actually a strategic way to stall and lower expectations. By framing themselves as the victim of bad management, they ensure that any failure is not their fault. Most people first notice this pattern in someone close to them, like a friend who is always venting. They call you to share their latest drama, but they never follow any of the practical advice you give. You realize they are not seeking a solution. They are seeking a witness to their perceived social persecution. In romantic relationships, this social expression can take the form of a dynamic known as emotional caretaking. One partner may use their constant anxiety or stress as a way to control the couple's weekend plans. They are too overwhelmed for the dinner party you wanted to attend, so you stay home to soothe them. You find yourself shrinking your own desires to manage the expanding cloud of their perpetual, vocalized dissatisfaction. Within families, the complaining pattern often plays out through the monopolization of the group's emotional bandwidth. The person who complains the most becomes the sun around which every other family member must carefully orbit. Family gatherings are shaped by their specific needs, their specific grievances, and their specific, unpredictable moods. This is a form of social engineering that uses the threat of a scene to enforce total compliance. Most people first notice this pattern in someone close to them, like a partner who is fragile. They highlight their exhaustion so effectively that you find yourself doing all the heavy lifting for years. When you finally express your own fatigue, they immediately trump your exhaustion with a more severe, vocalized pain. The social expression of the hidden self is a competitive game of who is the most burdened. We often allow this to happen because the brain is wired to feel a sense of communal guilt. The complainer is highly skilled at making you feel responsible for a world they find fundamentally broken. This creates a social environment where the person with the least resilience is granted the most authority. They harvest the empathy of the group while contributing only a sense of doom and heavy obligation. In romantic life, this can lead to a state of quiet resentment for the partner who listens. You become a repository for their negativity, but you find no space to deposit your own internal weight. The chronic complainer remains supported because they have effectively paralyzed your ability to ask for anything back. By observing this in others, you begin to see how the cost is paid by the surrounding group. It is a way of maintaining a central role without ever having to provide a central value. The social expression of the loud self is a cycle of seeking attention while rejecting all responsibility. We witness this when a relative demands help, but criticizes the specific way the help is offered. Their need is a hook designed to pull you closer, but their complaint is the bar that keeps you submissive. The answer to why they get away with it is that we are afraid of their noise. We follow their lead because we mistake their constant protest for a sign of deep and authentic sensitivity. The current digital and economic landscape has transformed the act of complaining from a social nuisance into a high-value currency. In the past, the chronic complainer was limited by the patience of their immediate physical neighbors and family members. Today, modern communication platforms allow individuals to broadcast their dissatisfaction to a global audience of millions instantly. The attention economy is specifically designed to reward high arousal emotions, with outrage and vocal suffering generating the highest engagement. Consequently, the brain observes that a nuanced, positive statement is ignored while a loud, public grievance goes viral. This creates a massive incentive for the hidden self to adopt a permanent posture of public and performative victimization. Most people first notice this pattern in someone close to them, like a friend who subtweets their drama. They post vague, distressed updates on social media, baiting their entire network into a state of concerned, high-alert questioning. By doing so, they exert psychological control over their social circle without ever having to engage in direct conversation. This modern social engineering quietly rewards the loudest victim while labeling the stoic or the quiet as unauthentic. We are told that venting is necessary for mental health, yet we rarely examine the predatory nature of the venter. The digital world provides a permanent record of grievance that can be weaponized against anyone who dares to disagree. In the corporate world, modern HR structures have inadvertently amplified the power of the vocal, chronic complainer. Because organizations are terrified of litigation or public scandals, they often prioritize the demands of the most vocal protesters. This creates a squeaky wheel culture where the most difficult employees receive the most attention and specialized, expensive resources. Society denies the psychological cost of this shift by calling it advocacy or standing up for one's self in public. While some advocacy is vital, the survival mind uses these noble labels to mask its own selfish desire for leverage. By the time the destructive nature of the complaining is identified, the individual has often secured a permanent, protected status. Modern life acts as a massive feedback loop for the most negative voices, making it nearly impossible for communal peace. We see this in the outrage of the day cycle, where the most offended person is granted the most authority. The hidden self thrives in this polarized environment because there is always a new reason to feel deeply, publicly wronged. Modern technology has taught us that our suffering is our most effective tool for gaining instant, unearned social capital. Many people feel a quiet, desperate pressure to find something to complain about just to remain visible in the crowd. We are witnessing the institutionalization of dissatisfaction, where the complaint is the only metric that truly moves the needle. The amplification of this pattern makes it harder for the resilient person to feel like they are being heard. We are building a social reality where the most influential people are the ones who are the most perpetually unhappy. What feels like a personal choice to be heard is actually a response to a landscape that ignores the satisfied. The result is a culture of high-functioning victims who are fundamentally isolated by the very noise they use for connection. This is where the pattern becomes a systemic weight that we all carry, regardless of our own personal mental health. Understanding this amplification shows that the get away with it part is a symptom of a much larger social illness. The most unsettling realization of the chronic complaint is that it serves as a permanent shield against true growth. You may now recognize the mechanics of the vocal victim, but knowing the strategy does not stop your emotional exhaustion. Recognizing the hidden self in a demanding partner does not return the years of energy you spent soothing them. The human brain is biologically compelled to fix suffering, which makes us forever vulnerable to those who perform it. We are left with the crushing awareness that the most difficult people often receive the softest path through human life. Most people first notice this pattern in someone close to them, but the deepest challenge is seeing it within. We all have used a headache or a bad day to escape a responsibility we simply did not want. This drive to use our own weakness as a weapon is a structural part of our shared survival architecture. The tension between being a supportive friend and being a used resource is a knot that stays perpetually tied. There is no simple resolution to a world where the loud protester is granted more validity than the quiet achiever. Awareness offers no relief. It only clarifies the price you pay for being the one who never complains aloud. You are now standing in a space of cold clarity, watching the theater of distress with a new, heavy understanding. The hidden self is a master of emotional blackmail, convincing the listener that their boundaries are actually acts of cruelty. Reflect on the people you avoid and ask if you are fleeing their problems or their tactical use of them. This clarity offers no sanctuary, only a sharper sense of the profound drain inherent in every one-sided social exchange. The cycle continues because we are terrified of being perceived as heartless by a world that values visible empathy. We are participants in a social game where the person who claims the most pain wins the most space. The closing of this examination is not a solution, but an entry into the uncomfortable reality of social leverage. Choosing awareness over avoidance means accepting that some people will never be satisfied because satisfaction is a loss of power. Staying with uncomfortable psychological truth is the only way to see the hooks buried in every public plea for help. Join a space where unspoken patterns are examined honestly, without the need for a comforting or simple resolution today. The power of vocalized distress is only one expression of how we manage the perceptions of those around us. Beneath the loud complaint lies an even more complex layer regarding how we define our own personal moral worth. We often believe we help others out of kindness, yet that help is frequently driven by a fear of noise. This leads us to a psychological idea that remains entirely unresolved. Are you actually empathetic, or just easy to control? There is a hidden connection between our need to be good and our inability to walk away from a drain. Understanding this dynamic changes how you perceive every request for help and every vocalized grievance in your life. Perhaps the most trapped person is not the one complaining, but the one who feels obligated to listen forever. What part of your own identity relies on being the person who fixes things that are designed to stay broken?